Hi, this is a brief review of Neolithic art, so make sure that you've watched the Paleolithic review because we'll be referring to some of the works of art from that period in this discussion. So Neolithic art, we're moving into a later period going from about 9,000 to 4,000 BCE. And what's important is that the world is changing in terms of its climate. It's getting warmer around the Mediterranean, and so the area, and that being the area that we're focusing on, so it's getting warmer, the sea levels are rising, animals becoming domesticated, and they're raising stock rather than going out on extended hunts, as was probably the case in the Paleolithic period. People are actually raising their own food, both in the case of animals and also agriculture. So agriculture is developing at this point. This means that these cultures are less nomadic, that they are actually settling down, that they're developing cities and settlements, and so there are a lot of archaeological discoveries that accompany these cities, and also artworks that we can analyze. So not only do we see small portable objects, but also things that are built into architecture because we have more permanent settlements. So very interesting changes happening in the Neolithic period. So we're starting off looking at Çatal Höyük, which is a site in modern-day Turkey. We're looking at a period in terms of the excavation for about 6,000 to 5,900 BCE. This city became wealthy and was able to develop into a relatively strong civilization through a trade of obsidian. So obsidian was very valuable because it provided a material for tools. So you don't have bronze or iron at this point, not a lot of metal casting. So without that, you need other types of tools. So obsidian is a kind of volcanic glass, and this volcanic glass could be used, it could be sharpened, and it could be used as a tool. So that made it very important. All right, here is a reconstruction of Çatal Höyük. So the previous image was the actual excavation, and this is a reconstruction. So you can see the structure was pretty much one large structure where you could add a room here, a room there. You could move from place to place within the structure through ladders on top of the roof, kind of move from place to place. But this provided a sense of security for those that lived there. The fact that that everyone was essentially living together in one structure, it provided more security in case there were people that came and tried to take their valuable obsidian or other valuable resources for the city. The key work that I want to focus in on is the so-called mother goddess figure. This is a figure that was discovered in the 1960s, and it's raised a lot of questions because of its similarity to some of the works that we saw in the Paleolithic period. So very exaggerated figure, very corpulent figure, exaggerated breasts, stomach, legs, and this woman is definitely emphasizing the fact, her maternal nature, being a mother. She's actually giving birth probably here. You can see there is probably a head coming here, but there's also markers of status, right? You have almost like a throne that she's seated on with animal heads on either side. One of the heads was actually replaced, and even more important than that, her head is a modern restoration. So the head itself is not original. It's not a Neolithic part of this sculpture. So that's important because if you recall, in examples like the woman of Willendorf, her face is obscured. So we're really not sure what the face looked like here, whether there was or whether there were these types of features, what the headdress looked like. So remember that this is a modern restoration and therefore not entirely accurate. But this does lend greater support to the idea of maybe mother goddesses during the Neolithic and Paleolithic period, great reverence for mothers, for the act of giving birth, for the act of providing life. So it's important to keep that in mind, and keep in mind that this type of imagery continues on into the Neolithic period. So we see a similar body type, a similar emphasis on women. We do see representations of hunting scenes as well with men, but there is a striking similarity between the two cultures. So it's important to keep that in mind. And you can see that, for example, the animals on either side of her seat, these are types of animals that we see, or similar animals that we see on thrones later on. For example, when we get to ancient Egypt, we'll see a pharaoh that had images of lions or sculptures of lions on either side of his throne. So just keep that in mind as we move on into the later period of art. Okay, and the other Neolithic structure that I'd like to talk about, the other Neolithic work of art that I want to focus in on, is Stonehenge, which is a very famous structure, very famous work. And we have a lot of preconceived notions about this structure. I'm guessing all of us have seen it at some point in our lives. It's a very impressive structure just in the fact that these stones are extremely heavy, that they needed to be lifted, that you have those trilithons, so those 3 stone things where you have 2 posts and then a lintel on top. So just getting the lintel on top would have been a big job. Lifting the stones so that they became vertical would have been a big job. The fact that Stonehenge changed quite a bit over time is also of great interest, that the circle changed, and there weren't always these huge post and lintel constructions, that it was modified over time. And it is very tall. The trilithons themselves are 24 feet high, so this is a massive structure and has always been very impressive, and has led to a lot of questions. What was it built for? What was the purpose? How could people have been motivated to build such a structure? And then just in terms of engineering, how was this structure able to be built? So all of those are important questions, and there have been many ideas put forth in terms of, rolling the stones and then lifting them through a series of pulleys, bringing people together, working together in order to do it. Were people motivated by spirituality, or were they motivated by a powerful leader? There does seem to be evidence that this was a burial site for certain rulers, so those who were in control, those that were in power. So that could have been a way of motivating people by the fact that they could have been punished if they did not. So that's a possibility. But something that we do know for sure is it seems to have been built in direct connection to the sun. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that on the morning of the summer solstice, the sun would rise directly over the heel stone. So the heel stone is here in the modern day photograph, and then it would be directed into this horseshoe shape of trilithons, and you can see that you would have a full circle of stones all along here. Right? So you can see these are the trilithons, the very tall ones right in the center, in this horseshoe shape, and then slightly shorter ones along the outside. So you can see the sun is rising up and shining directly on what's called the altar stone. Again, these are terms, of course, that are imposed on the structure. We don't have any writing from this period. But we do have evidence of burials at this site. They are still doing finding archaeological discoveries as time goes on and as archaeological digs carry on. They are making discoveries. There are indications that this was a place where people in power were buried, and that maybe this site was a place for healing, that people maybe came from far away and sought healing there. So there's evidence that people who weren't from this area came to Stonehenge and actually died there and were buried there. So the healing may not have worked for them. And so anyways, that may have been a destination for people to come to and to seek some type of healing that way. But it's definitely built in response to solar activities, which is not unusual. We have other megalithic examples of architecture that were built in response to various solar phenomena. Here's just another reconstruction over on this side. You can see that the stones are different colors, and so scientists, archaeologists have spent a lot of time trying to source the stones. How far away did these stones come from? What parts of England, what parts of this area were these stones coming from? Just to determine how far these stones were being carried or being rolled. And so people have guessed, or people have hypothesized, anywhere from a couple miles all the way to 100 miles. So there have been a lot of different hypotheses in terms of how far away these stones were taken. And just to further the point that there are multiple megalithic architectural structures or architectural designs from this period. So multiple that use these very large stones. And again, there's no writing, so we have no concrete evidence. All we have are later interpretations, later ideas of what they meant, or if there are myths that develop about these various alignments of stones. So most of what we know, or most of what we think about these structures, were people came up with them later. So it's important to keep that in mind when you look at these. All right, and then just a review of some of the terms. Megalithic architecture are just structures employing large stones. So mega, large, lithos, stone, so large stone. And then that post and lintel system that we see at Stonehenge, you have a lintel on top and two posts on the side. And remember that you can't have your posts too far apart or the lintel itself will break. There will be too much downward pressure in the center of the lintel. It also would become unstable. So once we move to Roman architecture, you'll have that nice arch, the pure arch that will create a better distribution of weight and that will allow for larger spaces to be spanned. But the post and lintel is kind of an early rudimentary form of the arch. Not a true arch, but an early form of spanning space.